Continue with my college football schedule preview and point spread prediction videos. Today I'll be doing the Florida Gators. So Florida, I think, has the toughest schedule in the country. It's so tough to where I think the best they could do is last year's record at 7-5. And if last season does turn out to be a fluke for Florida, I could see them easily only winning 5 games. And why I think Florida has the toughest schedule is because the 7 of their opponents, LSU, Miami, Texas A&M, Georgia, Ole Miss, and Tennessee, are all at least at the beginning of the season probably going to be ranked in the top 25, and I think all 7 of those teams are better than Florida. But the one that I would feel the best about if I was the Florida fan of those 7 games would be Tennessee because it's at home. And if you watch my Tennessee video, you know the history of that game when it's been played in Gainesville, Florida. But there's not any games on Florida's schedule where I would say they have a 0% chance of winning. But another thing that makes this really tough is they have to play 2 road games in a row twice, LSU and Miami, and then Kentucky and Ole Miss. The LSU and Miami, I think, will be the toughest of those two. I think if Florida can get one win out of those two, that will be good. But Florida's non-conference schedule is tough because they play 2 Power 4 opponents, Miami and Florida State. But it is nice that they get to begin the season with 2 guaranteed wins in the non-conference against LIU and South Florida. So for Florida to have a chance of beating Miami, I think their secondary is going to have to be better because in 2 games that combined against Carson Beck, Florida has given up 624 yards passing. And another concern about the Miami game is that Miami's defense, I do think, is going to be better than it was last year. And as bad as it was last year, it played well against Florida. And Florida State, I'll go ahead and tell you that I would take Florida to win that game. But the coaches in this game are kind of similar because they were both successful coaches at the group of five level, and that got them a Power 5 head coaching job. And I think they're both terrible Power 4 head coaches. And this will probably be the last game for both coaches. And LSU is about as tough as it gets on the road to start their conference schedule because Florida is 1-6 in the last 7 games against LSU at Death Valley, and LSU was third in the transfer portal in the country this year. And LSU's got a much better quarterback, I think, than Florida does. But some reason to be optimistic if you're a Florida fan against LSU would be Florida played their best defensive game of the season last year against LSU when they held them to just 16 points. But Florida's bye weeks, I think, both come at bad times because the first one comes before Texas and the second one comes before Georgia, who will probably be the 2 best teams that Florida plays, and the 2 least likely games of Florida winning. And while there are 0 guaranteed conference wins for Florida, Mississippi State is one that I think is a very likely win for Florida, and Kentucky it should be a win for Florida because I think Kentucky will be the second worst SEC team that Florida plays. But for Florida to have any chance of beating Texas, their defense I think is going to have to be better because Steve Sarkisian's offense gave Florida their worst defensive performance of the year last year. Florida gave up nearly 50 points to Texas and over 560 yards. And Florida's offense is going to have no chance of getting anywhere near 50 points against Texas. And Florida, I don't think has a good chance of beating Georgia because I think Billy Napier's biggest problem has been that his teams are not very good at the line of scrimmage, and with Georgia, that's what it's mainly going to be about. Georgia tries to wear out teams at the line of scrimmage. And having to play at Kentucky, uh, I would say, is what you would call a trap game where it comes on the schedule because it comes in between Georgia and Ole Miss, which are games that Florida is probably not going to be expected to win. And Kentucky is a road game that Florida is going to be expected to win. But having to play Georgia and Kentucky right before Ole Miss, I think is going to be rough because those are both physical teams. So Florida may be beat up before going against what should be a good Ole Miss team, even though I don't think they'll be as good as they were last year. But good news for Florida going against Kentucky is even though Kentucky is physical, they are not near as good everywhere else on the roster as a team like Georgia is, and they don't have near as talented linemen as Georgia does. So now for the point spread prediction, games in the green are games where I think Florida will be favored to win by a blowout, 20 or more points, and there's two of those, LIU and South Florida. Games in the blue are games where I think Florida will be favored to win by double digits, 10 to 19 points, and there's two of those, Mississippi State and Florida State games in the popular games where I think they'll be favored to win by about a touchdown, 6 to 9 points, and there's one of those Kentucky games in the pink are games where I think they'll be favored to win by about a field goal, 1 to 5 points, and there's one of those Tennessee. And games in the gray are games where I think Florida will be about a field goal underdog, 1 to 5 points, and there's three of those: LSU, Texas A&M, and Ole Miss. And games in the yellow are games where I think Florida will be about a touchdown underdog, and there's one of those, Miami, and games in the orange are games where I think Florida will be a double digit underdog, 10 to 19 points, and there's two of those, Texas and Georgia. So LIU, with them being an FCS team, Florida should be favored in that one by about 50 points. And South Florida, Florida should be favored in that one by about 30 points because South Florida isn't a terrible group of five team. And LSU, I think, will be favored by about 5 points against Florida. But if that was at Florida, I think Florida would probably be a small favorite. And Texas A&M, I think, will be favored by about 5 over Florida. And Ole Miss, that one's in the grave because it's a road game. It'd be in the pink if it was at home, probably, but I think Ole Miss will be favored by 3 or 4 points. And Tennessee, that one's in the pink because it's a home game. It'd be in the gray if it was on the road, but I think Florida might be favored by a point in that one. But it wouldn't be shocking if Florida was still an underdog in that game. And Mississippi State, Florida should be favored by a couple of touchdowns in that one, maybe 14 points. And Florida State, Florida should be favored by about 10 in that one because I don't think it'll be a blowout like it was last year because the Florida State was so horrible last year. You've got to expect that they'll be a little bit better. And Texas, I think, will be favored by about 2 touchdowns, maybe 14 over Florida. And I think Georgia will also be favored by about 14 points against Florida. And Florida, I think, will be, I'll say, a 6 point favorite over Kentucky or maybe 7 points. But that will be it with this video. Please subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon.